Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the engineer-producer. It's the one and only Jon Caffery, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry, and his life in music. He was born in the UK, but has spent most of his time in Europe and especially Germany, working with a lot of reggae people during the early 80s. Also Joy Division's Closer, and then has gone around Europe working with lots of amazing German bands, which you'll find out about in this interview, so I'm not going to try and mispronounce them all. So we're just going to get down to that exciting subject that was those early formative years. Jon, it's over to you.
It was basically when I'm 59, so I'm a couple of years older than you. When my oldest sister met her, the man that became her wife, they're recently divorced, but he introduced me to music basically, and funnily enough, I was listening to a lot of German krautrock at that time.
Right.
It was when I was about 11 years old or so. And bands like Neu, La Düsseldorf, Can, etc. And he was, I think he was about 18 or 19, and he was really into like recording and building his own amplifiers and fuzz boxes and stuff. And he had a 4-track tape recorder. And when I saw that, I knew what I wanted to do when I grew up.
Yes, my God, that was from the age 10 or 11 that you started to immerse yourself in this quite avant-garde music.
Yeah, and I used to spend like every holiday. They were at university in York. I always used to, like any chance I got, I used to go up and stay with him.
Yes.
And all my time fiddling in the studio.
Amazing. Did you were your parents at all musical? Did they have any kind of collection? Or sometimes people go, oh, my dad was a trumpet player for the Salvation Army. Did you have any kind of musical moments like that?
No, I mean, my dad was always really, really into music. He listened to a lot of, I remember listening to a lot of Glenn Miller and that sort of stuff. And he was also into the Beatles and Simon and Garfunkel and stuff like that.
Yes, well, classic ones. So did you, where did you grow up, by the way? What sort of area was this?
In southern England. I went to boarding school in a place called Southsea on the south coast.
Right, blimey.
And then spent most of my time in London, basically.
Yes. So what was your first gig you went to at this kind of stage?
Traffic.
Crikey. That was quite a good gig, wasn't it, really? Yes, blimey. Yeah. That was good. So when you got to sort of like the age of 16, which was probably about the late 70s, did you stay on then to do A-levels, or did you leave at that stage?
No, I was really lucky. My parents had split up, and my dad, he'd left. And my mum was really, really cool, and she really supported me with what I wanted to do. And I did my O-levels, and then I went back to do my A-levels. And after a couple of weeks, I said to my mum, this is completely pointless. I know what I want to do, and I don't need any A-levels to do it, because in those days, there was only one university course in Reading, the Tonmeister course, which came from Germany. And I said, I'll make some contacts and I'll get on with it. And she was really cool. She came down and spoke to the school, and all the teachers said, let him go. He knows, that's all he cares about is music.
Right.
So I was really, really lucky. Otherwise, I would have probably had to go to university and become a doctor or something.
Drastic. So did you, when you were at school, boarding school, were you into bands at that stage, or were you just fiddling in the electronics course and physics?
No, I mean, I played guitar and bass. I started at the same time, like when I was 11, I started playing guitar and stuff, and which I did, like, I played through school time. But then when I started working in studios, I didn't have the time, and I realised that there were so many people who were so much better than me that I better concentrate on working in studios.
Yes, because I've done quite a few interviews with producers, and it was all, who was it? Mark, oh God, it begins with S, but I remember he was in various kind of quirky little indie bands, and then sort of got himself the break, and then became sort of, just I suppose, I don't know, there was a documentary, wasn't there, with Jimmy Iovine, who was kind of part of that Beats music eventually, but he kind of was just a person sweeping up the studio floor and sort of hanging about a bit. So how did you manage to sort of become part of that kind of environment and world?
I wrote loads of letters to studios, and the first place I wrote to was Connie Plank. Are you familiar with him?
No.
He's one of the greatest German producers of all time. He died, it must be about 20 years ago or so, but he did a lot of these bands like Kraftwerk, Neu, La Düsseldorf, let me think, I think he might have done, he did stuff with Robert Fripp, and you have to look him up. He did some amazing bands.
Yes.
He was a real pioneer in like electronic music. I'm just going to have a look and see if I can find any other stuff.
So were you right? You were sort of not focused on the UK at this stage. You were already looking at Europe.
Well, I mean, he produced a lot of records which were among my favourites, and but he didn't reply. I didn't hear anything from him. Like all the studios, nobody wrote back. And then I picked one studio in London, in Soho, which is called Gooseberry Studios, and I started phoning there like once a month, and then once a week, and then every single day. And I got to know the owner's wife really well on the telephone. And I guess this went on for a few months. And then I thought, I'm just going to go down there. And I turned up, and the owner, Peter, was there. And he was in a complete panic because Sasha, his wife, had just been taken into hospital with a pregnancy in her fallopian tube.
Yes.
And he vaguely knew who I was. And he said, okay, stay here, answer the phone, write down the names and telephone numbers of anyone that calls up. I'll be back later.
Right.
And he came back a few hours later from the hospital. And he said, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, trying to get a job at a studio. And he said, well, come back tomorrow morning at 10. And I was in. And because I had quite a lot of knowledge from my experiments with my brother-in-law, I had a lot of basic knowledge which people wouldn't have normally at that age. And I did 3 months of cleaning the toilets in the morning, hoovering the studio, spending all day in the office. And at 8, I was allowed to go into the control room and help or watch or whatever.
Yes.
And then, do you know Dennis Bovell?
Yes.
Well, he was one of the engineers there. And he obviously did the reggae sessions, and they were often at night. So I used to spend, I was paid £1 a day. And with this £1, I had to decide whether I bought a packet of cigarettes, ate, or took the bus home. But I could only do 2 of them. So I slept at the studio most of the time. And, I mean, Dennis was like, well, my first mentor was Colin Potter, my brother-in-law. And then Dennis, he taught me so much. We used to work together the whole time. And then one day he didn't turn up for a session in the morning. He'd overslept, and the band was there. It was a Nigerian outfit, and I'd worked on sessions with them with Dennis. And after waiting for 20 minutes, I couldn't reach Dennis. They said, "Oh, come on, you do it, John." And so I sat down and I got on with it. And the owner came down a couple of hours later, and he went spare because Dennis wasn't there. But the producer, Aki Dean, he said, "No, it's no problem. we carry on working with Jon. It's great working with him, no problem. And then I was in as an actual engineer.
Right.
And, because I was also working in the office, I took a lot of the bookings. So whenever anything interesting came in, I wrote my name down for the session.
God,
that was a great time. I was there for about, 2.5 years, and worked with loads of punk bands. Let me think. Gary Newman.
Right.
I did Our Friends Electric and the Replicas album with him, plus all the Linton Kwesi Johnson albums, and worked with the top reggae artists, basically. I mean, people used to come from Jamaica to record or mix at that studio, so it was from Iroy, you name it, I worked with him then.
Yes. Did you do the British kind of reggae scene, like Aswad and Burning Spear and Mr.
I mean, I used to work with the musicians from Aswad the whole time. Drummy, the drummer.
Yeah.
He was one of the top session drummers at that time.
Yes.
And he played on that Silly Games from Janet Kay.
Yes.
And that was one of Dennis's productions.
Yes.
And
well, it was a glorious time for roots reggae, wasn't it? Because we sort of
amazing.
It was kind of the Sly and Robbie period, and there used to be this thing called the Taxi Gang, where they would play for 3 hours and have different front men, basically. And I went to quite a lot of those, but also all that British stuff. But there was also Dennis Brown and Gregory Isaacs as well, which was a glorious period, really, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. And also I worked with Adrian Sherwood then. Together with Prince Farai,
right?
Creation Rebel. Do you know that album Starship Africa?
I don't know that one, but I remember Tackhead and
It's still one of my favourite dub albums of all time.
Right, because we got
worth checking out.
There was Augustus Pablo, wasn't there? Meets King.
Yeah, that's right.
There was that one. Yeah, because it's interesting, because I did an interview with, there's two producers. Is it Mick Thorne, who'd worked with Soft Cell, but before that I'd worked with Deep Purple. And then the other guy was Mark Saunders, they both had a really similar experience of working in studios like you did, of just being really fixated and having to kind of literally sort of hang about, brushing up. And then one day were told, actually, could you just go and do that session because no one's here? And they just had to do it, and that was it. So it's kind of, that was the 80s way of doing it, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, the kids, the people go to schools, these private schools, to learn engineering and stuff. And I think in a way, the system was really good in those days, because you got paid basically nothing. And it really weeded out the people that wanted to do it, really wanted to do it, from those that thought, oh, that'd be a cool, glamorous job.
Yes.
And, I work with, young engineers today, and they've been to these schools and stuff, and they paid so much money, and basically they haven't really learned very much.
Yeah. So that must have been, so you worked with people like Adrian Sherwood at that stage, and the On You Sound system.
Yep.
God, that's amazing. Yeah. So how long were you at Gooseberry Studios?
I think it was about 2 years, and then I had my first burnout, well, my only burnout. I was 17 when I started there, and by the time I was 19, 20, I was absolutely finished, and I took a 3 month break, because I was working 7 days a week, at least, 15 hours a day.
Yes.
And then I got in touch with Britannia Row, which was Pink Floyd's studios. Because they were also one of my favourite bands when I was a teenager. And then it was really funny. I spoke to the studio manager, and he asked me what I'd been doing. And I told him that was the Gary Newman stuff and Linton Kwesi Johnson. Bass Culture was his favourite album at the time. And he said, yeah, come down. So I went down to Britannia Row and got the job straight away.
God, so was this kind of now about sort of 1981, 82?
Yeah,
God.
yeah.
So were you still sort of on that dance scene, or had you sort of moved over to any other sort of, I was just thinking of that post-punk time of the sort of early 80s.
Yeah, I mean, that's when I did the first thing that I did at Britannia Row was magazine, with Howard Devoto, and Martin Hannett was the producer.
Right. And
And
was Martin still together there? Because I did an interview with a guy from Wasted Youth the other day, which was a band, and he said Martin just was just laying on the floor, a bit drunk.
It was more than drunk. Wasted Youth I also worked with, and that was probably around the same time.
Right. With Rocco and Ken.
Pardon?
With Rocco and Ken.
Yes, yeah. And it's really funny. So many bands come back to my mind now. We're talking about this. So I did the magazine album, and then
was John McGeoch in the band at that stage?
Yes.
God, what was it like working with John?
Well, I mean, it was just mixing the album.
Right.
So they'd recorded it in I don't know, in a warehouse with a mobile or something. The album, but they were. I mean, Howard Devoto was a really, really nice guy. He lived around. I found out he lived around the corner from me in Notting Hill at the time, and that was. And then the next thing we did was Joy Division. A few weeks later, basically, recording and mixing Closer.
Blimey, was that? What was your memories? What were your memories of that experience?
Great. It was a really, really great time. I mean, Ian was basically pretty quiet but very funny and stuff. And he was a little bit different to the rest of them. The rest of them were, they were just like lads. Every spare minute they were going down to the pub and stuff.
Yes.
But it was really interesting working with them. And it was, in a way, it was quite groundbreaking, that album.
Absolutely.
That we made. And the studio, Britannia Row, that they had this next to the recording room and control room. There was this massive room. I guess the ceiling height was probably about 20 meters or something. A huge room. There was a full-size snooker table in there, which looked minute in the room. And I started using that room as like a reverb chamber by putting a speaker in one corner and miking up the room. And that's got a lot of the sounds on that album that makes it so special was from sending the stuff out into this huge room.
Yes, it sounds a bit like the experience they had in Berlin with Hansel, kind of a large space with Tony Visconti and David Bowie and Brian Eno. So, yes, because there is a density to that album, isn't there?
Mm.
Which was quite something. So did you? Yeah. So you were there engineering it. So with Martin and was it Michael Johnson as well? Was the assistant?
Yeah, Michael was my assistant.
Right, he was. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So what? What was? It must have felt quite amazing seeing the tracks coming together and the songs being put together in a mix.
Yeah, I mean, what was great was they were so open-minded, and Bernie, we had the same musical taste. We'd been listening to the same records when we were teenagers. As it was the same with Gary Newman. He was also listening to all the krautrock that I was listening to. So there was an immediate understanding with Gary and with Joy Division.
Yes. And did when they sort of were doing it, had all the songs been well sort of rehearsed and demoed at that stage, and they were just having to try and get the sound, or were they doing much work, kind of changing things around?
From the musical arrangements, everything was fixed. when they got to the studio. They were well prepared. I don't know whether they'd actually made demos. But not everyone used to make demos in those days.
No.
Go from the rehearsal room into the studio.
Yes. Was there any
one of the big differences between Gooseberry and Brit Row was at Gooseberry, the studio was running 24 hours a day, and you might have 3 or 4 different artists coming in within those 24 hours. So you'd be jumping from doing, I don't know, a Eurovision Song Contest to some heavy punk band to lovers rock all in one day. And you had to work really, really fast because the people didn't have like huge budgets that were working in that studio, and it was really, really good experience.
Yes,
and all like through my career, I haven't like fixed myself into one particular style of music.
Yes, well, absolutely. But was that experience with Joy Division doing Closer? Was that quite? Was that draining? Did you, by the end of it, because of the density and the kind of lyrical, was it just like just another session and thinking, yeah, that was good? I just wonder how you felt by the end of it, because as a listener, it's quite a colossal piece of work, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've always found that, like when I'm working on particular albums, at the time when you're doing it that you're doing something really special, and so it was like that with Joy Division, and it's also like the atmosphere that you have in the studio with the people. You get to know people really, really well in a very short space of time when you record with them.
Yes, I would imagine, seeing the dynamics. I guess you saw that Beatles film, the 8-hour film, where they're sort of trying to record the last album together. That kind of process of the dynamics. The dynamics must have felt really interesting, seeing the 3 of them being a bit laddish, and then Ian on his own.
Yes, yeah. I mean, he had a few heavy epileptic fits when we were making the album. I think one day he fell down a flight of staircases, and it was such a shock. I don't know how long was it? Something like three months or something after we finished the album. And I was listening to the John Peel show one night, and then they announced that he was dead. It was really, really weird.
Yes, it's the weirdest one. Yes, you never get used to it, but the first time when you're young, the first time you've known someone who's died, especially in those circumstances, it's surreal, really. I don't know what other word to use. It just is bizarre. Yes. It's hard for the brain to compute. So after Joy Division, what then? Well, that must have been like, God, a bit of a high point, mustn't it? Only 43 years ago. Gee, that's weird. Yes. Yeah. So what was your next kind of project in Britannia Row?
Well, I did several bands for Factory. Section 25. I don't know.
Oh yes, yeah.
And but then, like, the music scene started changing, and like the new romantic thing started getting popular.
The Blitz Kids.
Yeah, Spandau Ballet and
Sade, Duran Duran.
Yeah, and it wasn't my cup of tea at all.
Yes, and also there was that Trevor Horn production. The Trevor Horn production sound started to become quite vogue, didn't it? Really.
Yeah, I think that was a couple of years later.
Yeah.
But I thought, I wonder what's going on in Germany these days. And then a couple of weeks later, there was an advert in the back of the Melody Maker I'd started. Before I even started working in the studios, I made myself a plan for my career, and I wanted to start working in studios as soon as possible, and by the time I'm in my early 20s, having some hits and stuff, and by mid-20s, start producing. And it all went to plan, but it went quicker than I expected and stuff.
Right.
And so there was the studio in Frankfurt that advertised they wanted a house producer for the studio. So I got in touch with them, had an interview, and about 2 months later moved to Frankfurt and worked in the studio there. And the owner of the studio, told me that it was like the forefront of Neue Deutsche Welle. But in actual fact, I think I only worked with one German band while I was at the studio. All the rest of the stuff was bands coming from America.
Right. What studio was that?
Called Hotline Studios.
Hotline.
Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds like a John Major thing. Cone Hotline. Yeah. So who did you work with from the Americans? God, why was one going to go from America to Germany to do a recording session?
Because the owner of the studio, he used to spend half his time in Los Angeles and the other half his time in Frankfurt, and he had a production company, and he signed people, and they had to come and record in his studio in Germany. But after a year, I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm wasting my time here.
Yes.
So I checked out a few studios in Germany and wrote to Dirk's Studios, which is near Cologne. And that was owned by a guy called, or still is, by a guy called Dieter Dirks. And his one of his main claims to fame is he did the Scorpions.
Oh, yes.
But he did them right from the beginning, like their first records and stuff, and he wrote a lot of the songs in the beginning and stuff. And he had this really nice studio complex with 3 studios. And I got in touch with them, and then a couple of weeks later they said, "Oh, we've got a session for you." It was like a long weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, with a band called Abwärts from Hamburg, which was sort of German, I guess they call it punk rock.
Right.
It was I went up to and spent the weekend there, and we didn't actually record anything because the drummer spent the whole weekend tuning his drum kit. But I had a really good time, really nice weekend with them. And then they said, come up to Hamburg and we'll finish this record up there. And 2 of the members of Abwärts, one was Mark Chung and the other one was FM Einheit, who were also in Einstürzende Neubauten.
Right.
So I did this 12-inch with Abwärts, and when I finished mixing it, I remember in the afternoon when I was finished with the last mix, I walked across Hamburg with Mufti to another studio called Hafenklang, which was directly at the harbour, and started making the first Neubauten album.
Blimey.
First studio album from Neubauten. And which was a completely crazy time. I mean, that was one of the craziest recording sessions I ever did.
I would imagine. Yes. What were the band like at that stage?
Well, Blixer. Have you had any contact with Blixer? Do you know?
Yeah, I did an interview with him a year ago when he had a new album. It was probably last year, actually, and they were just looking to do a tour. So
you've got an idea of what he's like.
But he was very different now than he probably was in the early mid-80s, wasn't he?
Extremely difficult when I met him. And I remember the studio. You went into the studio from one street, and it was built like on it was on a hill, and you came in on like the top floor, from the control room. You had this most amazing view of the harbour, and when you'd see like tankers being turned around as the sun comes up, it was really spectacular. That was really surreal.
Yes.
And but it had, I think, 3 or 4 different levels, and so we went down to find Blixer, and he was down in the basement, and in the basement there was another cellar, a small cellar. And he was in there. There was water, like he was sitting on a bar stool with his leather trousers and Wellington boots and codpiece. And there was water, I guess it was couple of feet deep or so, and he was sitting down there with his amplifier on another bar stool playing guitar.
Right.
And
that was a bit of a health and safety, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah, yeah. And then we worked for about a month, and I mean we used to work for, I don't know, sometimes 36 hours. We used to work
right
through, and you'd be just so spaced out. And after a while, the communication from the bands, like, nobody was really talking to anyone. They were all in different parts of the building these instruments out of whatever, rubbish or scrap metal, etc. And I used to walk around and have a listen to what they were doing and mic them up, and then go up to the control room and think, oh, this would fit well on such and such a song. And sometimes I recorded them without them knowing that they were being recorded. And basically that was how most of the album was made. It was like accidental or random.
Yes.
It was, like I say, it was one of the craziest times ever.
Which album was that?
Der Zeichnungspatient OT.
Right, I got you. The one in '83. Blind. That was on some Bizarre records, wasn't it? By then?
Yeah.
So that was it. My God, that was kind of experience. Yeah. So then, God, that was Blixer. And what was Alex like? Is it on percussion?
Alex is great. I mean, Alex is such a lovely person. I mean, they were all really, really nice. Andrew Unruh, he's unique, the guy. Let's put it like that. I mean, I don't think that for the first 3 weeks he didn't turn up to the first session that we did. And but the first time I met Alex was when I was doing the Abwarts 12-inch before, and I was recording bass with Mark. And Alex came in. He heard that Mark was playing bass, and he ran out into the recording room and started messing around with Mark's amp and the sound and stuff. And I said to Mufti FM, I said, "Who's this guy? What the fuck's he doing?" and it was Alex, and he made this most amazing bass sound. And I've always loved working with Alex.
Yes, my God.
Yeah.
What track was that on?
That was on Holiday in Beirut.
God, I have to check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, God. So as the 80s were progressing, because, was much changing sort of on I mean, a lot of things were changing in the studio by then, wasn't it? Let's face it. I just wondered how that...
I mean, we still weren't really working with... it was still all tape-based in those days. But the studios had more equipment than... I mean, when I worked at Gooseberry, it was really, really basic. We had like 4 compressor limiters, which also had noise gates in them, an eventide harmonizer, a spring reverb, and 2-track tape machines for tape delay.
Right.
And then I moved to Britannia Row, and that was completely the other extreme, because they had a studio hire department where they rented gear out to all the other studios in London. And there were rooms just full of equipment. And, you never ran out of gear there. You could always go up and get some more channels for the desk or another tape machine or whatever. And that was a real luxury.
I could imagine. Yes, there you go. So then as the 80s progressed and you'd had your experience with Blixer, where do you then sort of go for the next moment?
Well, then, while I was working with Neubauten, we did this, the first month, and then I left. Somebody picked me up from the studio and took me up to a place in North Germany, to a place called Fresenhagen, and to work with a band called Tonsteine Scherben, who were one of the biggest bands in the late 70s, early 80s in Germany, and they came from the left-wing alternative scene in Berlin. They were like some of the first squatters in Berlin. And they moved out to this place, Friesenhagen. They bought a farm, and basically it was a bit like a commune, and they all lived together and ate together and stuff. And Rio Reiser, the singer, he's got a really his reputation for lyric writing was really high. And in Germany, lyrics are so much more important than they are in England. Yeah. It's the most important thing for Germans when they listen to German music is the lyrics more than the music, basically.
Yes.
And I mean, that was something I had to learn moving from England, was that you had to make the vocal in Germany much, much louder than it ever was in England. In England, it was like part of the music, the vocal, you know. And but over here, it was like, well, it's got to sort of really stick out, and they want to. I mean, it's not a very easy language to sing, and you have to get it over as clear as possible. Otherwise, you know, they couldn't understand it.
Yeah, I could imagine. Then, yes. So, what was that experience like? Were you working on an album with them?
Yeah, we did an album. We recorded it up there on the farm.
Yes.
And they were really good. Blixer was a massive fan. I mean, Tonstein and Scherben was his favourite band, basically. And that's how I got in touch with them, because they told Scherben that they were working with me, and it was really good and stuff. And that's how I ended up working with Tonstein and Scherben. And I think I was up there for 6 weeks recording the album. And then somebody drove me, when we were finished recording, drove me back to Hamburg to the studio with Neubauten. And I went and did something like another month with them. And, I mean, there were quite a lot of stimulants to keep you going, if you know what I mean.
Yes, well, I would
imagine. We were
imagine.
just working crazy hours. And as soon as that was finished, I was picked up again by Tonstein and Scherben, and we drove down to South Germany to a place called Hilportstein to mix their album there. And so I'd been working for, I don't know, weeks and months solidly every single day. And by the time I was through with that, I was completely finished.
I would imagine, because quite a lot of bands often talk about working with, I think it's a guy called Hugh Jones, and they just said he was extraordinary because he just didn't eat, but he just smoke and drink and just work until the project was finished. Did you have a slightly similar ethos of your own career at this stage?
Yes, yeah. It was. I mean, there was nothing. It was the main thing in my life. It was the best thing for me to do, was like doing music and stuff. And you know, when you're in your early 20s, you don't worry about your health that much.
No, personal hygiene goes out the window, doesn't it? You never smelt deodorant at Glastonbury in the 80s, I tell you.
No.
So yeah, but you were just so you were sort of like somebody just kind of like, this is Jon's the man. Pick him up, take him to the studio. He'll just do it.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, and
there was another connection, like with my next. The next thing I did was a band called the Toten Hosen.
Oh yes. Now this is what
Jochen Hulder, the manager from the Hosen, had been managing Neubauten, but they just fired him. But he heard about me as well, and I think I was back in London then, and he called me up and asked me if I'd come and see his new band, Die Toten Hosen. So I went over to Berlin, and I think that was the first time I met Mark Reeder.
Right, good old Mark.
And I saw them play, and they were absolutely terrible. They couldn't play at all. I'd never seen a band so bad, basically, with their instruments and stuff. But the singer, Campino, it was like he had so much charisma on stage. It was like really obvious that the guy was a star and stuff. So I thought, well, I'll have a go working with them and stuff. and then made their first studio album. And I think all in all, I did 18 or 19 albums with them over the years.
My God, that's longer than most people's marriages.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
God, you must have grown to love that band. I mean, because that guy I mentioned, Mark Saunders, who'd been, he'd done, the UK, worked with lots of people, including Tricky, which was really difficult at times. Went to America, worked with Cyndi Lauper, that was very difficult as well. But then he's like, he's kind of knackered now. But he said that occasionally a band would sort of give him lots of ideas and almost expect him to, sprinkle the fairy dust on it and say, give us a hit. And he just goes, no, you're going to have to come back with more of an idea. Did you ever have that experience of thinking, I'm not the band, you're the band who needs to bring the ideas. I can make it sound good, but I can't actually create the sound for you or put the arrangements together?
No, I mean, I did, I've always, after I started producing and stuff, the process became, they'd send me recordings from the rehearsal room that they'd made, on cassette or something, and then I go into the rehearsal room with them and work on the arrangements, and then demo the songs. Like with the Hosen, we always, on every album recording session, we'd record about 30 songs or something, but it would start off with the demo sessions, and I received something like 40 songs or so from the rehearsal room, and then go into the rehearsal room, work on the arrangements and stuff, and then go into the studio and record all 40 songs in one day, basically, with all the possible overdubs that could go on it. And the quality of the playing, the performance wasn't important at all. It was just a question of documenting the songs with the arrangements.
Yes.
And then they'd go back into the rehearsal room, drop maybe 10 or 15 of the songs, but there'd be another 8 which they would have written in that time. And sometimes we did 3 demo sessions, so possibly all in all recording maybe 60 songs or something, in demoing 60 songs before whittling down the songs which go on the album.
Yes. God damn. What was the last album you worked on with them?
It was the MTV Unplugged in the Borg Theatre in Vienna. And
that was it. There you go.
Yeah.
Did you? They have gone on to do other albums since then, haven't they?
Yeah, they've changed their direction quite a lot since we stopped working together, and they became much more mainstream. We had, let me think. The first album we did sold about 30,000 within the first couple of years. The second album was the same. The third album sold less, and then the fourth album was it was like cover versions from 50, 60 German pop songs, basically, but played with a punk rock attitude.
Yes.
And it went out under the name Die Roten Rosen instead of Die Toten Hosen. And the album was called Never Mind the Hosen, Here's Die Roten Rosen, sort of taken from Never Mind the Bollocks. And the artwork was exactly the same as the Pistols album.
Yes.
And that jumped to 100,000 sales. And then we did a live album, and that did 250,000. And then one of the best albums that we ever made was a Kleines Bisschen Horror Show, which was it became a concept album. They were asked to do music for The Clockwork Orange, which was being put on in the theatre in Bonn, and they were sort of acting in the play, but also the stage opened up and they played 4 songs live, and that was, I think, Here Comes Alex was the first top 10 single that they had. And then the next album, let me think, jumped to, I think the next album sold 1 million or so.
Crikey. What year was that? What was that?
That album is called Opium for the Folk.
Right. So that was...
I mean, if you want, I can send you some links to some of these songs.
Yes.
I've done over the years from different directions and stuff.
God, that would be amazing. Yeah, because I was just looking, actually. Yeah, that was good. I think they got a bit of a sort of traction in the sort of the 90s Britpop period as well, didn't they? Did John Peel pick them up as well at this stage?
I mean, John Peel was into them right from the beginning. I think they'd done a John Peel session before I even started working with them.
Yeah. Good old John. I know he had a real fondness. I think, because Mark told me that he had sort of hung out with John. Well, John came and stayed with him, and they did a bit of a tour of Germany, Berlin, and things like that.
Right.
They did a tube special, didn't they? Right. So there you go. So that was your So you worked with them right into the 90s, didn't you?
Yes, I think it was like 2005 was the last album that I did with them. But it was the right time to finish, basically, because you get into, I don't know, after working together for such a long time. I mean, they used to go into the studio, and I suggested a few years before to Campino, the singer, that we split, because I didn't get it all become a bit too routine, if you know what I mean. We go into the studio and we know that we come out of the studio and we'd have a top 10 album, you know. And it all became more conservative, and basically the music didn't excite me anymore.
Yes, I think that's where David Bowie could get quite... he had good timing, didn't he? He could sort of change personnel and producers and studios, locations, and bring in different ideas. Even when they didn't always work, at least it was slightly different. So you can't knock the man for his kind of ambition, really, can you?
Oh no, I mean, absolutely amazing.
Yes, just a bit.
Yes,
just a bit. Yes.
Are you familiar with a band called Exmal Deutschland?
Yes.
Yeah, it was from Hamburg, and it was all female group, and John Peel did quite a lot with them. And funnily enough, I did last summer. With Anja Huwai, the singer. She made her first album since the late 80s, early 90s. And you know Mona Moore, huh?
Yes, I've done an interview with her. She's got into doing soundtracks for games, hasn't she?
Yes, yeah. Well, I met Mona in 82 in Hamburg when I was doing the first Neubauten stuff. She was actually the girlfriend of the singer from Abwärts, from Frank. And she just made her first, I think it was maybe it was an album, but the single was Single of the Week in Melody Maker. New Musical Express and stuff.
Yeah.
And when I heard her voice, I thought, wow, she's amazing. And I always wanted to work with her. But we never got it together. We worked together on one album in the 90s, but she was there more, I think, as an arranger, and she'd help write some of the songs and stuff. and we lost touch. And then she called me up this summer, and she said, "Hey, Jon, I want to work with you." And I said, "I don't believe it. I wanted to work with you for years, Mona." And it's one of the best things that's happened in the last 10 years.
Excellent.
Meeting Mona again. I did. I'm mastered and sort of did post-production on her album, which came out in last autumn.
Yep.
And she recorded this album with Anya Urai.
Yeah.
And as soon as I was finished with Mona's album, I did Anya's album, which is absolutely, I love it. It's one of the best things I've done for years, I would say.
Fantastic. Yes. Because I remember she mentioned that she'd done a session, I think it was in this studio in Cambridge, Space Ward Studios, with, I think, a member of the Stranglers. But this, I don't even know if the release came out, but I just remember her talking about...
It's come out recently. I think it came out last year.
Yeah, because she did some incredible work with, did a lot to do with her family stuff, wasn't there? And Germany during the 40s. I don't know. I remember her kind of story was quite kind of boggling, really. So, yeah. Well, so was this about an album called Snake Island that you did?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it was. She worked together. She made the album. She worked with a guy called Ralph Goldkind, who was also a really, really old friend of mine. I also met him in that the same time as Mona in the early 80s with Neubauten. I mean, I think he played trombone.
Right.
And I think I probably did about 5 albums with Neubauten over the years. And he was always invited to the recording session, and he played like trombone on nearly everything we recorded, but in the end it was never used. It became like a running joke when Ralph came down.
Yes,
but he's remained a dear friend for years and years and years. And he worked with Mona on this on Snake Island and stuff. And they mixed the album, but they weren't 100% happy with it, so they sent me the stems of the mixes, and I sort of remixed the album with the stems and stuff. And I loved it, Mona loved it, Ralph loved it, and Mona and I are planning to do a lot more work together in the near future. She's been asked to do the music for a film for Werner Herzog's son, Rudolf Herzog.
Right.
That's one of the projects for this year, and doing more Mona stuff.
Oh, that's fantastic, because I know she was kind of busy. Did you ever come across in your travels, Gary Asquith from Renegade Soundwave? Because he was kind of, I don't know, he was part of but his partner was kind of in one of these Berlin punk bands, beginning with letter M, called, it was, but they were kind of famous at the time in the sort of the mid-80s. But I didn't know if you ever stumbled them. They would have been part of that kind of same scene, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you should mention that, because I also, do you know a guy called John Gosling, also known as Mekon?
Oh, yes.
I mean, he's a really, really old friend of mine.
Did he work with the rap artist Roxy Shante?
Maybe.
I might be getting this confused, but I do remember a guy called Mekon who did some early hip hop, but that might be a completely different person. We could be getting our wires.
I mean, he worked together with a guy called Mark Rutherford for years, and they did the first Goldie track, Metalheads.
Right.
And John was in Psychic TV originally when I first met him.
Okay, yes. Did you ever come across Alex Ferguson, who was in Psychic TV?
No, I never met him.
Yeah.
But I started working with John again last year. I mean, last year was really strange. I had contact with so many people that I worked with years and years and years ago. And it's been great. I've had so much fun working with these people again.
Yes.
This
Well, it's kind of interesting because I don't know if you came across this band in '79 called Rima Rima, but there was a band that featured people like Marco Peroni and Gary Asquith and Dorothy Max Bryant and various other people who went on to, I think, Wolfgang Press and people like that and Mass. But there's been a film that has just been made about that particular. They only put out one EP, but someone's made a film about them because they were quite influential.
Yeah, Anja from Exmal Deutschland, she wrote to me a couple of weeks ago and told me about it. I never knew they actually existed, to tell you the truth. But once again, a coincidence, because John Gosling, he did a remix, I think, for the film of one of their tracks.
Right. That's interesting.
We just finished an album for this young Romanian lady. I think she's in her mid-20s. Called Jiz, and basically she's spoken word poet, if you like.
Oh.
And it's really great, the album. It's she also plays sax. She only started playing 2 years ago, and she's the most incredible saxophone player. Unbelievable. I couldn't believe it when John told me she'd only been playing for 2 years. I'll talk to John and see if I can also send you a track from what we've done. It's not released yet, but I think there's a good chance that I can send you something.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be amazing. Yeah, John Gosling is the guy, I think, who did work with Roxy Shante. I really like this hip-hop artist from 1985. She did a song called Bite This, and John Peel used to play it. So I think that I was just kind of looking, actually, if that was Mekon featuring Roxy Shante, What's Going On.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So did you, God, you've done a lot, haven't you? Did you then build a studio for yourself, or have you?
Yes, I built a studio in Belgium in the early 90s, and it's still one of the most amazing studios on the planet. We had an old hat factory. The recording room had 3,000 cubic meter recording space, so it was one of the biggest recording rooms anywhere. And I had a Belgian partner, and after 2 years I realised that it wasn't working out. I was doing all the work in the studio. I was getting all the work in for the studio. And then I suddenly thought, well, the only time I was employed, it felt like I was working for him. And in the end, I said, no, I want out of this. And it took, I don't know, about 5 years of legal hassle to get out of the whole thing. And I mean, the studio was an amazing space and stuff. And I remember the day that I signed the papers to get out of the studio. I was doing my last album there. I think it was with FMI Night with Mufti from Neubauten, and I looked from this wonderful recording room into this. From the control room into this wonderful recording room. I thought, it's just a fucking studio. There's no point in getting down about it. And I got out of the studio, and then I planned to move to France. And I went down with my wife, and we were looking for spaces, old chateaus and stuff, to build a residential studio down there. But after spending, 2 weeks, we realised that it wasn't. The people in south of France, some of them are really, really strange. As you know, like there's a lot of right-wing people down there. And we had one really horrible experience in a place called Nîmes when we were staying in a hotel. And there was an American guy staying there, and he'd been there for months because he was from California, and he was doing something with the vineyards there, like teaching them some of the American ways to make wine and stuff. And he used to go to this bar every night and got on really well with the people. And the night that we were staying at the hotel, he came out of the bar, and then 5 or 6 people came out after him and beat the shit out of him. And he came into the hotel completely bloodied and everything. And it was really clear for us then that that wasn't the place where we wanted to be and stuff.
No, jeezy crazy, no.
Yeah.
No, crikey. I mean, it's not on quite the same level, but we had, one of those experiences. We had a nice house, but a horrendous neighbour, and it was like the only thing was to move because they weren't going to change, and we had to take it because it just put you on edge all the time. It's just horrible, So you learn to quickly think, let go, and think it's great, but it's, as you said, it's just a studio, it's just a house,
Exactly, yeah.
And so then where did you go after then?
Well, we carried on with our journey. A friend of mine had just moved to Barcelona, a Dutch guy from Maastricht who had a studio there that I used to work at quite a lot. And so we went down to Barcelona to see Ed, and my wife fell in love with the town, and we ended up buying an apartment there. And the plan was to find a property outside Barcelona to build a studio. And we found an object near Figueres, which is north of Barcelona, and went to the estate agent, and it was quite a drive from the estate agents to the house. And I explained to her what I wanted to do to make sure that the space could be usable as a studio. And her son was working in the office that day, and he said, there's a really good new studio that's been built close to Figueres on the way to the house that you want to see. And there was something on like the local television about the studio. And so on the way to check this house out, we stopped at the studio called Musicland. And it was purpose-built, the studio. So they erected the building, and still one of my favourite studios anywhere in the world. And so we started looking for, I thought, well, I can use this place. It's got everything that I want. They've got 2 mixing desks in the studio. One is a solid state Logic, and the other one is a Neve from 1965. I don't know if that means anything to you.
No, not a lot.
Okay, so absolutely classic mixing desks and stuff. And wonderful atmosphere, great monitoring in the studio. So I started doing a lot of stuff there, and then we were living in Belgium at that time, Belgium and Barcelona, and so we were going to sell a house in Belgium and move down to Barcelona completely. And then my wife's grandfather died, and the grandmother was, she didn't have any other living relatives apart from my wife, so we decided to get rid of Barcelona, and we moved back to Germany to be close to her. And that was in, let me think, that was like in the, probably end of the 90s.
Right.
And stuff. Yeah.
God damn, that's quite a lot of trend. It's a lot of manoeuvring you have to do. I mean, I guess you learn to live to move quite lightly at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, I've always, we've moved within Germany since we came back to Germany, and I've always thought like life is a journey for me. And my wife, she passed away with cancer 5 years ago. And I thought to myself, well, for me, the journey's not over. I want to another country, learn another language properly, experience a different culture and stuff. So as soon as my daughter would be finished at school in 3 years, she would have done her A-levels, and I'm planning to move to Fuerteventura.
Excellent.
In the Canary Islands, yeah. Because these days it doesn't matter where you live, basically. You know, if you've got your workspace at home, I'd say that today 70% of the stuff that I do is mixing and mastering. And if there's a whole production to do, I always have to go somewhere, you know, to leave home to do it. So
yeah.
If I have to come back from Fuerteventura to Northern Europe, it's absolutely no problem.
God damn, yeah, blimey, that's amazing. I think, is it Youth? I think he's got a place in the south of somewhere. I seem to see pictures of him sort of recording members of various bands at the moment. So
who's that?
Youth, yeah.
Yeah.
But somewhere south and warm. He's often got shorts on and looks quite sort of, you know,
yeah.
and a lot of chest. So
I mean, I don't know if you know Fuerteventura, but it's a bit like Mars. It's all like volcanoes and like sand deserts and stuff, just like in the Sahara and stuff.
Yes, I know Lanzarote's like that, isn't it? So
yeah.
That's what a similar place actually. So yeah, so what are you working on at the moment?
I'm working on a live concert. I did an album about 3 years ago with some. Basically, they're just like jazz musicians, and they got in touch with me and said that they wanted to make a prog rock album. And I thought, well, I've never made a prog rock album. Maybe I should try it. And
yes.
Absolutely incredible musicians. The drummer is a guy called Wim de Vries, and he's supposed to be the best jazz drummer in Europe and stuff. And it was a three-piece setup, and they wanted to do a new interpretation of Pictures at an Exhibition from ELP.
Yes, classic.
Yeah, so Marcus and Wim, the piano player and drummer, they did this. They wrote this thing for a modern dance company. It's about 2 hours long, the whole thing, and it's like a continuous piece of music, which is based on Beethoven. And I started working on it last spring, but like I said, it's 2 hours long, and they said there's no rush, nobody's waiting for this album, take your time. So I worked on it on and off for 2 or 3 months, and I've still got to finish that, and that's the next thing that I'm going to do.
Fantastic. That is so cool. That's so cool. You know, just because I was just getting a little bit confused earlier, did you say you did a song with, was it Mark, Holiday in Beirut? Was that one of the...
Holiday in Beirut, that was with Abbas. Yeah, but with Mark Chung from Neubauten.
Right. Mark Chung.
And Mufti, the FM Einheit, he was one of the drummers in Neubauten.
Right. God, I know.
Mark left at one point. I mean, it was the vibe with Neubauten at that time was absolutely terrible. I think that was late, in the early 90s. And in the end, Mark left the band. And then the next album, halfway through the album, Mufti left. And that was the album called Ender Neu.
Right.
And we've recorded a lot of it at Connie Plank's studio. And that was at the time that my studio was being built in Belgium, and we finished it off in my studio in Belgium. And in the end, there was just Blixer and Andrew and Alex. Mufti and Mark had left. And for me, it was like, it wasn't Neubauten anymore. they'd always like pushed everything to the limit and been really extreme. And Blixer at this time he wanted to make music, songs and stuff like that. So I mean, I finished that album off, and it's a good album. But they went in a direction that didn't really, compared with the crazy stuff we did in the 80s and stuff. You couldn't really compare it.
Yes, God damn. Yeah. That's such a story, isn't it? I mean, if you could have just whispered something to your 16-year-old self starting out in this kind of interest in industry, is there anything in particular that you would have advised or sort of nudged or pointed? I mean, even if you ignored it. I mean, I know most people say, "Oh, I wouldn't change a thing," but I just wonder if there was anything in particular you would have thought, "Yeah, that would have been worth focusing on," or.
Yeah, I mean, you never know. You never know what's around the corner and stuff. I often wondered what it would have been like if I'd stayed in London and not come to Germany. That was if my life would have been completely different. One thing that I really regret was when I was making that first Neubauten album. There was one telephone in the studio, and it was like 3 stories below. And somebody came up one day and said, "Oh, there's someone on the phone for you from England." But by the time I got downstairs, the line was dead and stuff. And then I went back to London a couple of months later and went down to Britannia Row to visit the people down there and stuff. And the studio manager, Nick Griffiths, he said, "Where have you been? New Order were looking for you for about 3 months because they wanted to make Blue Monday with you." So, that's the way it goes.
Yes, so close. That was... Never mind. But then, yeah, I know, like you said, but your adventures through Europe are just extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a great life, and I know that I'm really, really lucky to have, your hobby is your job.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, dear listener, is a clean edit. Indeed. Anyway, a massive thank you to Jon Caffery for giving me the time for that interview. If you want to go to his website, it's all one word, Jon Caffery, which is JON, then CAFFERY . Then it's just DE. There you go. And yes, you'll find out more about various other bands he's been working on. This has been the C86 Show. David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 Show. All these interviews have been archived, so you can find those on Spotify, iTunes and Podbean. It's true. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.